So the SCO summit has concluded in Samarkand, Uzbekistan. While there was no bilateral between Prime Minister Modi and his Chinese President Xi Jinping, or for that matter with Pakistan Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif, he did have bilaterals with Russian President Vladimir Putin, as also, surprisingly, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Pakistan, of course, raised the Kashmir bogey yet again. The question was, who was listening? No one quite is sure about that. Next year, India will be hosting the SCO summit. In fact, it starts holding the rotating presidency of the SCO starting today. As India's stature in the world stage grows, the question that's going to be asked is how long can we be friends with the United States and European partners and yet at the same time be part of groupings like the SCO, which have Russia and China in it, which are antagonistic to the West.
Amid global turbulence in the wake of Russia's invasion of Ukraine and China's saber-rattling over Taiwan, Prime Minister Modi landed in Samarkand in Uzbekistan for the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit. This is the first in-person SCO summit since the leaders gathered at Bishkek in Kyrgyzstan in June 2019. Prime Minister Modi shared stage with Chinese President Xi Jinping and Russian President Vladimir Putin, two world leaders who are at loggerheads with the Western world. While addressing the summit, Prime Minister Modi said member states should grant each other transit rights to ensure better connectivity.
SCO की भूमिका बहुत महत्वपूर्ण है। SCO को हमारे क्षेत्र में विश्वस्त, रेजिलिएंट और डाइवर्सिफाइड सप्लाई चेन्स विकसित करने के लिए प्रयत्न करने चाहिए। इसके लिए बेहतर कनेक्टिविटी की आवश्यकता तो होगी ही, साथ ही यह भी महत्वपूर्ण होगा कि हम सभी एक दूसरे को ट्रांजिट का पूरा अधिकार दें।
His reference was clearly to Pakistan, whose Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif was present at the SCO leader session. After the summit, Prime Minister Modi held one-on-one talks with Vladimir Putin. With Russia's war on Ukraine in its 7th month, India continues to maintain a neutral stance. While that stand had irked US and its allies in the early stages of the invasion, they've stopped pressuring India over its ties with Russia. After all, Russia is a key supplier of weapons and energy for India. Prime Minister Modi also came face-to-face with Xi Jinping for the very first time since the start of the military standoff in Ladakh in 2020. While there was no bilateral between both leaders, Xi Jinping extended his good wishes to New Delhi on taking over the chair of the SCO summit, which will be hosted in India next year. Putin and Xi, two of the biggest leaders at the summit, have taken a staunch anti-West stance. But Prime Minister Modi continues to strike a balance while advancing India's own interests.
I want to first go across to Abhishek Jha, our colleague who covers the MEA. He's joining us from Samarkand. So the SCO summit itself has concluded. There was bilaterals with Putin, with Erdogan. No bilateral or any kind of interaction with Xi Jinping, except the both of them were next to each other at the photo op that happened earlier today. Just walk us through how significant this meeting was, particularly in light of the fact that this is the first time that all of them were in the same room, whether it was Prime Minister, whether it was Xi Jinping, whether it was Shahbaz Sharif, the Pakistan Prime Minister, at a time when India now gets the chair, the rotating presidency of the SCO.
So, of course, Zakat, this was a very crucial meeting, especially for Prime Minister to address all the leaders, because India is going to host the 2023 SCO summit in back at home. In that context, it became really important for him to engage with all the leaders. We know a Turkish President Recep Erdogan, who is also at a bilateral with Prime Minister Modi, came at a very crucial point, because it was a very surprising bilateral that Prime Minister Modi just had with Erdogan, because it was not announced. But we know the kind of dynamics Turkey has with Pakistan and China. It was a thing that India, we were not expert that India and Turkey will engaging closely in order to have more strength. Talk about the technological export. If we talk about the naval shipbuilding aspect, electronic equipment manufacturing, all those high-end technology Turkey has, defense manufacturing Turkey has, and India can collaborate for its own need. Turkey. Uh, Apart from that, Prime Minister is also having a bilateral meeting with Vladimir Putin, where both will be discussing the bilateral relationship in the ambit of United Nations General Assembly, and also in the upcoming G20, where how these two nations should work collectively in order to achieve the desired goals. Uh, SCO Forum Prime Minister has to underline three major points while addressing the multilateral. One was the transit, that all the member countries should allow transit through their land route, so that market access could be allowed for all the countries. We know that in the past Pakistan not allowed India to have market access to Afghanistan through Afghanistan Central Asia. In fact, so much so that Pakistan did not allow even humanitarian assistance. India was trying to send to Pakistan, to Afghanistan, go through its own land route, and for weeks and for months, the wheat consignment that was supposed to go and feed millions of Afghani people were waiting in Punjab because Pakistan was not allowing those trucks to pass through its land borders.
Okay.
So that in that context, this mentioning of Prime Minister Modi's remark that transit routes should be allowed to all the member countries is very important. Prime Minister has also tried to highlight the issue of health at global stage, and he said how traditional medicine could be a handy as long as those complete and holistic health and health is considered. And for that he has said that SCO member countries should also explore their own rich heritage and wealth of knowledge, so that the traditional medicine could also come as a part of healing
All right.
in a broader perspective. Prime Minister has tried to raise the issue of food security in the context of Russia-Ukraine conflict, naming that conflict and the aftermath effect which has disturbed the global food supply chain. PM said
Abhishek, we'll leave it at that.
millets
Abhishek
could
Jha there reporting for us from Samarkand in Uzbekistan, where the SCO summit concluded today. Let me now open this up to our panelists. Pinak Ranjan Chakravarti, former secretary in the Ministry of External Affairs. Andrew K.P. Liang is a China strategist based in Hong Kong. Sushant Sareen, senior fellow with the Observer Research Foundation. And Dr. Sergei Drvenov is the IDC Russia and director WHT International Board. Let me start with you, Pinak Chakravarti, because I think just a few days ago, the Foreign Affairs Minister, Jaishankar, had described the state of the relationship between India and China will depend on the state of the border. And in keeping with that, do you think it was expected that there will be no formal interaction, not even a handshake or photo op exchange between the Chinese president and the Indian Prime Minister? What is the current state of the relationship, given that we've just had this engagement in the fourth location, which is PP15, just days before the SCO summit began?
Yes, External Affairs Minister Jaishankar did say that, and I think what you're seeing is a reflection of that event in Samarkand, where there is a meeting. I don't think we asked for a meeting, and the Chinese, being Chinese, they've said, let the Indians ask for the meeting. So I think we may have got stuck in that thing, ki pehle aap, pehle aap. So that must have happened, and even at the photo op, you mentioned that there was no handshake or they didn't look at each other.
Correct.
I think it was expected, because the border situation is still not gone back to the status quo, which is what we have demanded, and that's what we want. And that it was said that unless that is rectified, the bilateral ties cannot be rectified. So I think that is where we stand, and really there has been no sort of interaction with the Chinese president. So I think this is part of that policy that we are continuing.
Sushant Sareen, one fundamental question that's being asked, of course, SCO has evolved in the last 20 years of its existence. But what are we doing in a grouping which has countries like Turkey? Of course, there was a bilateral that the Prime Minister had with the Turkish president. It has Pakistan and Russia and China, which are now very firmly inimical to the West, to the United States, and to Europe. So what is a country like India doing in it? How long can you have one foot in the Quad and one foot in the SCO?
We can do that.
Zaka, we got into the SCO at a time when the world was quite different to what it is right now. When SCO started, it was primarily a security-driven organization. It was focused on things like terrorism and strengthening regional security. And then, the agenda kept expanding. And that was also a time when Russia was part of the G8. China was a very, the American president, the great Barack Obama, the great visionary and all of that, used to talk about a world which was divided between America and China, the G2 formulation. So that was a very different world. And this was a grouping at that point of time, which, we were not averse to getting into because we felt that, if there's a regional grouping coming up, it's better to be in it than be out of it. Yeah. And I think because now we are in it, I don't see what is the purpose of coming out of it just yet. But what has happened over the last few years is that because of the kind of positions which the SCO has taken, there have been a number of occasions when the SCO has, or the other SCO members have decided on something and India has stood out and India has not been part of that particular understanding which these guys have entered into. So I think it's a kind of a tightrope walk which India is doing by staying on in the SCO. Since it's a regional organization, it does make some sense for us to be in it. Its politics is troublesome. Some of its members are even more troublesome. Yeah. Some of its potential members are going to be even more troublesome. Turkey, for example. Now, Turkey is an avowedly hostile country under Erdogan towards India. It was never exactly the best of friends with India, but under Erdogan, he's taken it to the next level. So yes, we have all kinds of dubious elements as part of SCO. And yes, going forward, I think we will have to try and balance out our involvement with the Quad and with our Western partners with whatever little comes our way as far as an organization like the SCO is concerned.
Shaina NC is also joining us. Shaina, I think, Sushant, just as you were joining this broadcast, made a very valid point. We got into the SCO at a time when the global architecture was very different. Today, the global architecture is very, very different. Russia and the United States are at loggerheads. We have our own differences with China. And today, Prime Minister met the Turkish president. Of course, no one's saying we should not have bilateral engagements. But we know that Turkey has been inimical to our interests in the past. So how does one continue to do this balancing act? Because it's like you're having two legs and two boats. At some point, you're going to trip and fall.
So, Zaka, I just want to say that what actually is the Shanghai Cooperation Organization? I mean, you look at the historic kind of influence, which obviously your other panelists have spoken about. I only want to say just to understand that the South and Central Asia issues and India's role in it currently, vis-a-vis, be it our neighbors, be it the influence of China, all of that is very, very important. And do understand, different prime ministers have played geopolitics very differently, but the prime minister, our prime minister, Narendra Modi ji, is in a commanding position when it comes to any decision which is taken in the larger interest of India. And the times are gone where India used to walk behind. So I think that our kind of major regional security issues need to be addressed. We need to have certain answers. Energy supply is a big question. Investment is always a matter of interest. So obviously, if we are part of this dialogue and discussion, only then will we have answers to the more serious questions that are relevant to India. But I do want to say that our country proud of Prime Minister, as is the world diaspora. And whenever you have engaging, be it trade, be it energy, be it investment, people have viewed India as a serious player. And that's not necessarily the case with places like Pakistan or even China for its double speak or its million colors of revolution. So I think that the results will be welcomed. And we are in safe hands, so just let's leave it at that.
Andrew KP Leung is joining us from Hong Kong. Andrew Leung, Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping of China have met, I think, 18 times in the last 8 years. This would have been the first time that they would have met since the Galwan clashes of 2020. And this was an opportunity for a meeting to sit across the table and figure out, what are each other's positions. And clearly, the fact that that meeting did not happen, that's on China, because China is the one that changed the status quo. Out of the 6 places where they changed the status quo, in 4, there has been disengagement that has happened, but 2 are still outstanding. And as the External Affairs Minister said a few days ago, the relationship cannot be normal until the border becomes normal. And that is entirely on China, not on India.
Well, I don't think the Shanghai Cooperation Organization is a forum designed to solve bilateral problems. This particular meeting of the SCO is unlike any others because it comes at a time when the whole world order is changing fast. I mean, look at the war in Ukraine. For example, India is not exactly on the same page as the United States. It's trying to formulate a more constructive relationship with Russia. And if you look at the SCO, there are other members wanting to join, including Iran and various others. And the SCO is only one of other groupings in the developing world, like the so-called BRICS plus. Plus means plus African countries, other African countries, plus Afghanistan, and plus the Middle East and UAE, and so on and so forth. Now, what does all these signify? It signifies that a complete shift in the whole world global order, an order no longer dictated at all times by the United States. In other words, a lot of the developing countries do not want to be at the beck and call of the United States, and they want to reclaim their sovereignty. They want to look at their own national interests, and we're living in a more
you say that the
world.
United States is the one that's changing the sovereignty, or at least trying to change the status quo of sovereignty of smaller countries. But if you look at Russia, Ukraine, it is Russia that's the aggressor here. If you look at China, Taiwan, it's China that's the aggressor. It's Russia and China that are trying to change the status quo.
No. I'm not referring to the status quo. I'm only referring to the reality that after the Second World War, the United States, in fact, has been the world hegemon, dictating its terms and trying to force other countries.
Sure.
To
But
follow
what's been happening in the last few years? What's been happening with Russia, Ukraine? What's been happening with China, Taiwan? Who is trying to be the hegemon?
Well, that's what I'm saying. Other countries have got to look at their own security interests as well, like India, like Russia, like China. So I think that more and more nations in the developing world are coming to this kind of thinking. And that's why the SCO and the idea of the BRICS Plus have a lot of traction.
Okay, let me ask Sergei Dvoryanev, because when this war began, and understandably, NATO expansionism was continuing, it was knocking at Russia's doorstep, and so Russia carried out this special military operation. It's going to be 7 months now. There doesn't seem to be any end in sight, and with the recent reverses that the Russian troops have faced in the eastern parts, in Izium, in Kupiansk, does it seem likely that this war is going to continue to grind on? Or will Vladimir Putin and Russia have to come to some form of a negotiated settlement, as we're showing pictures of the bilateral summit between Prime Minister and President Vladimir Putin? India, of course, has taken a slightly more nuanced position from its Western partners when it comes to Russia. It's engaging Russia. It's still buying oil from Russia. But at the same time, you cannot have this war in eternity. It's got to end sometime.
Yes, true, very true. But you cannot make any negotiations with evil. And first of all, I want to say that Russia is not to antagonistic mood to West. The West is an antagonistic mood to our country, unfortunately. It is not a war. Vladimir Putin, he very frankly explains that all this fascism and all this nationalism of Ukrainian society and military society, which was increased by the Western patronship of United States, show to us that it was many years back general strategic plan of the collective Western countries, and they do it against Russia because they in the mood of some exploitation and domination, we can say, under the eastern part of the world.
Okay.
That is their vision of the future. That is their, we can say, the model of the development of society, of the human society.
But Dr.
Right now we can see
here's the problem. The problem is if this was a swift 3-week operation or a 3-month operation, everybody would have moved on. But this doesn't seem to be ending anytime soon. And the longer it goes on, it seems like Russia is not able to hold on to territory. Started off with, wanting to take Kiev in a blitzkrieg. That did not happen. Then it got restricted to the Donbass. And now Ukraine is pushing back in a way that it's even saying Crimea is on the table.
We don't know. First of all, I'm completely believe to the will of God. We can see that eastern part of the world right now is a traditional part of the human civilization. We have some common roots. Even China and India, they have some particular interests, but they're not in direct conflicts. Because why? Because there's the two traditions, Asian civilization. Their roots in religion, their roots in some spirituality and the family tradition. What we can see in western part of the world, we can see, first of all, it's like civilization, they lose their roots, spiritual roots, and they do create some new ideology, which is like service to the evil, service to the profit, service to the power.
Okay, let me ask Pinakaranjan Chakravarti, one big peeve that the West had with India and maybe to a lesser extent with China around the Russia question was that India and China continue to import oil from Russia. The West believes, rightly or wrongly, that we're actually giving a leg up to Putin. Of course, the foreign minister, the prime minister, they've been exposing the Western double standard when it comes to importing oil. After all, Germany and other European countries are still importing oil from Russia. But has that sort of peeve been settled, or will that continue as long as this war continues and India continues to import from Russia?
No, I don't think that peeve has been settled. And to put facts on the table, the US is still importing $1 billion worth of oil and gas from Russia. And of course, Europe is importing much more. Of course, there are problems, prices, overpricing, over sanctions, how to pay for it and all that. So I don't think that stands any chance. I mean, it's full of holes, that argument, that India is propping them up. It is the USA which is propping up Ukraine with billions of dollars of arms and ammunition to carry on the fight. That is, moreover, the US has now also...
All right, Ambassador, I'm sorry I'm interrupting. Can we just listen to what the Prime Minister is saying?
तब कई विषयों पर हमारी चर्चा हुई थी और उसके बाद भी जैसा आपने कहा कि अनेक बार हमारी टेलीफोन पर भी चर्चा हुई है और उसमें भारत और रशिया के बायलैटरल संबंध की भी बातें हुई है और दुनिया की जो समस्याएं हैं उसके संबंध में भी काफी विस्तार से हमारी बातचीत हुई है। आज फिर एक बार हम मिल रहे हैं और आज भी दुनिया के सामने जो सबसे बड़ी चिंता है और खास करके डेवलपिंग कंट्रीज को फूड सिक्योरिटी के, फ्यूल सिक्योरिटी की, फर्टिलाइजर की, ऐसी जो समस्याएं हैं हमें जरूर उनके रास्ते निकालने होंगे और आपने भी उसमें पहल करनी होगी। उन विषयों पर भी आज चर्चा करने का मौका मिलेगा। एक्सेलेंसी, मैं आपका और यूक्रेन दोनों का इस बात के लिए आभार व्यक्त करना भी चाहूंगा क्योंकि जब शुरू के दिनों में इस संकट के काल में हमारे हजारों स्टूडेंट्स यूक्रेन में फंसे हुए थे, आपकी और यूक्रेन की मदद से हमारे स्टूडेंट को हम सुरक्षित रूप से बाहर निकाल पाए, उनके घर तक हम पहुंचा पाए और इसके लिए मैं आप दोनों देशों का आभारी हूं। एक्सेलेंसी, मैं जानता हूं कि आज का युग युद्ध का है नहीं और हमने फोन पर भी कई बार आपसे इस विषय में बात की है कि डेमोक्रेसी और डिप्लोमेसी और डायलॉग, ये सारी बातें ऐसी हैं कि जो दुनिया को एक स्पर्श करती है। आने वाले दिनों में शांति के रास्ते पर हम कैसे बढ़ सके उसके विषय में जरूर आज हमें चर्चा करने का मौका मिलेगा। आपका व्यू पॉइंट समझने का मुझे भी एक अवसर मिलेगा, लेकिन फिर भी जो विषय हैं जिसकी बातें मैं करता रहता हूं। एक्सेलेंसी, भारत और रशिया के संबंध अनेक गुना बढ़े हैं। हम इन संबंधों को इसलिए भी महत्व देते हैं कि हम एक ऐसे मित्र रहे हैं जो पिछले कई दशकों से हर पल एक दूसरे के साथ रहे हैं और पूरी दुनिया भी जानती है कि भारत के साथ रशिया का नाता कैसा रहा है, और रशिया के साथ भारत का नाता कैसा रहा है। और इसलिए दुनिया के मन में भी ये बात है कि एक अटूट मित्रता है। और व्यक्तिगत रूप से मैं कहूं कि एक प्रकार से हम दोनों की यात्रा समान शुरू हुई। मैं सबसे पहले आपको 2001 में मिला, जब आप हेड ऑफ द गवर्नमेंट के रूप में जाए, और मैं हेड ऑफ द स्टेट गवर्नमेंट के रूप में काम शुरू किया। आज 22 साल हो गए। हम लगातार, हमारी दोस्ती बढ़ती चली जा रही है। लगातार हम दोनों देश मिलकर के इस रीजन की भलाई के लिए, लोगों की भलाई के लिए काम कर रहे हैं। आज SCO समिट में भी आपने भारत के लिए जो कुछ भी भावनाएं व्यक्त की है, मैं इसके लिए आपका बहुत आभारी हूं। एक्सेलेंसी, मुझे विश्वास है कि आज की हमारे बायोलेटरल भी, आज की हमारी बातचीत भी आने वाले दिनों में हमारे संबंधों को भी गहरे करेंगे। विश्व की जो आशा अपेक्षाएं हैं उसको पूर्ण करने में भी बहुत काम आएगी, ऐसा मुझे पूरा भरोसा है। मैं फिर एक बार आज समय निकालने के लिए आपका बहुत बहुत आभारी हूं।
Again, stressing on the twin issues of food and fuel security, also thanking the Russian president as well as the Ukrainians. And interestingly, he said that in the presence of Vladimir Putin for allowing the Indian students who were studying there in Ukraine to be evacuated when the war began. Let me go back to Ambassador Chakravarti. So what do you make of what the Prime Minister said? I think he flagged this in the initial opening comments in the multilateral as well, where he said food security and fuel security, particularly for the developing world, needs to be factored in.
I think Prime Minister was indirectly appealing to President Putin. Please find a solution. He talked about dialogue, talked about diplomacy, and he pointed out the problems that the developing world is facing. So I think he's making it quite clear that this war is not being viewed as very productive for the rest of the world, and it is in fact churning up the international order to such an extent that everybody is facing problems. So basically, I think he's done it before many times, and he said that since 2001 he's been in touch with President Putin. He was, and then has been talking to him in a friendly way. Then he of course emphasized that the bilateral relationship they will carry on and will deepen. And so India is making it very clear, as far as Russia is concerned, our historic ties, etc. We still believe in it, that we can carry forward on those ties. In the various fields.
I'll give Sushant the final word. I got less than a minute to wrap up. Sushant, what do you make of the comments made by the Prime Minister? I thought it was interesting to say in Vladimir Putin's presence that he also thanks the Ukrainian government for helping the Indian students be evacuated.
No, I think that was smart diplomacy. I don't think he was trying to do any kind of monkey balancing, but I think he was very clearly signaling to not just Mr. Putin, but I think to our Western partners that, look, the Ukraine issue is something that, I'm not letting it slide. I bring it on the table, and I'm counseling the Russians side that they need to use dialogue and diplomacy to try and sort this issue out.
Yeah.
But having said that, I have very good relations with Russia, and we want to take this relationship forward. Now, again, I think there's a bit of hyperbole in our historic relations with Russia and all of that, because there's both good and bad in the way the relationships have panned out over the last 75 years. But then this is what diplomacy is, that even when you want to say very harsh words, you say that in a way that it sounds very nice sweet to the other guy's ears. So I think that's the kind of path that the Prime Minister tread today. I'm sure not anybody in the West can take any umbrage at what he said. You can't, target him on that.
Correct.
But at the same time, he's pressed the right buttons as far as the Russia-Ukraine conflict is concerned and the India-Russia relationship is concerned.
All right, we'll leave it at that. I want to thank all our guests, Sushant Sareen, Mr. Chakravarti, Andrew K.P. Leong, and of course, Dr. Sergey for joining us. We'll leave it at that. That's a wrap. Thank you very much for your time.